You know, Lincoln wanted to get off the farm. We'll talk a little bit about his estrangement from his father later. But because he wanted to get off the farm, he would hang around shops, taverns, the general store. When he traveled, he would hang around courts. He'd go talk to lawyers. He would talk to judges. He was confident that he could walk up to somebody and begin a conversation with them because he did have that inimitable humor and ability to tell stories on the frontier. There were no TVs, no radios. It's something you can tell your students. But you know, the people who can tell the stories are the ones who are going to be the most popular in an age when there's not mass entertainment. You're the one who's going to gather the people around you. So Lincoln is gathering people around him as he goes to these different venues, and he decides to become a lawyer, and he finds that he's really good at it. Technically, I've had lawyers tell me who have looked at Lincoln's cases, technically, if you look at the cases of Lincoln's actual legal defenses and his prosecutions, and basically he was a trial lawyer, and oftentimes he represented the biggest corporation of the day, railroads. Oftentimes, when he was out on the circuit for that 3 months in the spring or that 3 months in the fall, he technically did not always win on the merits. What is it about us, though? We know sometimes when somebody is telling maybe the more accurate story or the more logical story, the more statistically apt story, but our heart ends up going to the person who has the more winsome story, the better story. Juries found in favor of Lincoln's clients again and again, frankly, according to the lawyers who've analyzed his work, because of his ability to tell these stories. And he would set his client in a very sympathetic way, and he would use analogies, that homespun frontier humor. And out on the circuit, he was very, very popular. Abraham Lincoln was a celebrity on the circuit. He had the largest territory in Illinois in his circuit. He had to travel more miles than anybody else. People enjoyed it when Judge Davis and Abraham Lincoln would get into town, because Lincoln, they knew, would entertain them. And at the taverns at night, they would trade stories. Well, Lincoln was the best storyteller of them all. What a great way to start a political party. What a great way to begin your political career, by traveling the largest circuit in the state and making all of these friends. You're the Pied Piper. People want to come to you when you get to town. If people had one complaint about Abraham Lincoln in those taverns, they'd tell their stories. All the guys would be tired from having had some kind of wine or beer or some hard cider or whatever it was they were drinking that night. They'd want to go to bed, and they'd tighten the ropes of the bed, you know, and men would sleep in the same bed. It's not because they were gay. That was the custom. And Lincoln would have 2, 3, 4 other guys in this big bed. He didn't take the candle down. He kept reading. He would read. The one thing that irritated the people was that he would read into the night, because you see, he could not turn off his mind. And already he was thinking, how am I going to connect with you the next day? How am I going to argue that case so that the jury comes over to my client, even though we've got this little problem logically? That's what Lincoln was doing. He knew the key is to connect. A people person. That's the first thing you would notice about Lincoln. What's the second thing you would have noticed about Lincoln as a person? I think if he were to come amidst us, we would notice his passion. The passion would have expressed itself differently at different phases in his life. The passion would have expressed itself as a young man in ambition. Here was a guy who wanted to make something of himself. He did not want to die on a farm. He did not want to just go into anonymity the way so many of his ancestors had. He wanted to make something of himself. And over the years, as you read Lincoln biographies, over the years you see this transformation from sort of a self-centered ambition to put your scent on the world into something much greater that's going to turn into a desire to serve a cause much larger than himself. And when he has all that time to read at night, and he's going back and he borrows the Indiana legal code, and at the front of the Indiana legal code, when he's about a 22-year-old starting to read the law, what's in the front of the Indiana legal code? The Declaration of Independence. the Constitution. He's reading them. He actually goes. Now, of course, you talk to lawyers in their legal training today. Lawyers today complain, especially if they're interested in constitutional law, they don't take courses in the Constitution. They don't actually go back and study the Declaration of Independence and the origin of the Constitution in our Constitutional Convention and the debates over it, the ratifying debates, and the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists and the Federalist Papers and all that. Lincoln was a lawyer who went back, and the most beautiful thing he would read in the Indiana Legal Code was the Declaration of Independence. It would have an enormous influence on shaping him. So you see this young man with passion, a burning desire to do something, to get out of a dirt floor cabin and not die anonymously on the frontier, but to go out and make his mark. And you all know the story. By the 1850s, our country was living with a contradiction. The Compromise of 1850 trying to have us live with popular sovereignty. The Missouri Compromise, not yet repealed, saying no, we're going to live with 3630, no slavery above that. One is a geographic distinction. The other is a democratic distinction. What principle is going to be running our country? Is it geography above 3630, no slavery, or is it democracy, the vote? Lincoln knew that a principle divided against itself could not stand. As we're pushing west, is it going to be geography, democracy? Or is it going to be principle based on the Declaration of Independence? Lincoln is pulling all this stuff together. Think about riding the circuit, that large circuit in Illinois, as a young lawyer, and having all that time on your hands. You don't have Sirius and XM radio and Rush Limbaugh and all those things. Lonely, lonely hours, and he filled his mind, and it shaped his passion to do something. So you know that by the 1850s he had transformed himself from somebody who was seeking maybe vainglory, same way Washington did when he was a young man, and moving beyond that to do something truly great for his country, because he perceived a problem that if we were going to be the last best hope of mankind, we damn well better figure out what we were. Are we a democracy that tolerates slavery, or are we a republic that fulfills the vision of the founders? That's the ambition. That's the passion that Lincoln acquired. And we would note that in our conversation with him. I think the third thing we would notice about Abraham Lincoln is that he had imagination. Now, this imagination expressed itself in many key ways. We see the imagination certainly in the storytelling. And biographers are very quick to try to tease out, when they read all the stories about Lincoln, which stories he made up and which stories just, pretty much came down and he transmuted them some way. Lincoln had a tremendous capacity to imagine, to see things that aren't actually physically there in front of you. That's what the good storyteller does to entertain. He takes you out of your tough existence for a few minutes. He transports you someplace. To make somebody laugh is usually to separate yourself from your existence a little bit. It presents a little bit of irony about your condition. Lincoln was a master at these things because he had the imagination, the vision to see what was not there. Now, that's on a small scale. This is personal interactions. What about the big scale vision that really defines a statesman? Statesmen have to have vision. They have to have that capacity to imagine what is not there and what needs to be improved. Well, he certainly had it when you look at the way he viewed this country. Now, most people, when they study Lincoln, and certainly when we teach it, we emphasize the North-South connection. And Lincoln fixed it in his mind that this nation has to be united, North and South, so that we can survive. It's the same issues that Hamilton had confronted at the Constitutional Convention. It's the same things Henry Clay had said in all of his writings, working out the compromises that the great compromisers himself had worked out. They knew the country had to have the glue to stay together.